The Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star began as a response to an urgent challenge. By the mid-1940s, jet propulsion was transforming aerial combat, and the United States found itself lagging behind both allies and adversaries in jet fighter development. The German Luftwaffe's Me-262 and Britain's Gloster Meteor had demonstrated the revolutionary advantages of jet speed and climb performance over piston-engine fighters. For the United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, the absence of a domestic jet platform threatened to leave American pilots at a severe disadvantage. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, led by the legendary engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson, was tasked with closing this gap as quickly as possible. The result was an aircraft that would not only become America's first operational jet fighter, but would also serve in active military roles for decades, eventually seeing service in conflicts well beyond its expected lifespan. The conceptual groundwork for what would become the F-80 was laid in 1943, when the USAAF issued a requirement for a single-seat, high-speed, jet-powered fighter, capable of matching or surpassing the Me-262. Johnson's Skunk Works team at Lockheed responded with unprecedented speed. Working around the clock, the team designed a prototype that incorporated lessons from aerodynamic research, including a streamlined fuselage, thin, straight wings optimized for subsonic jet speeds, and a tricycle landing gear that simplified takeoff and landing operations. The choice of power plant proved critical. While the United States had no native jet engine ready for production, the design relied initially on the British de Havilland Goblin turbojet, which was licensed for American manufacture as the Allison J-33. This arrangement ensured that the aircraft could move from blueprint to flight testing without the delays of engine development. Lockheed's engineers faced numerous technical hurdles during the design process. The aerodynamic characteristics of jets, particularly their high-speed handling and rapid acceleration, were still poorly understood. Cooling and fuel flow systems required new approaches, as jet engines generated far more heat and consumed fuel at unprecedented rate compared to piston engines. The team also had to design a fuselage structure capable of withstanding higher stresses from speed and altitude. In total, Johnson's group produced a working prototype, the XP-80, in just 143 days, a remarkable feat of wartime engineering efficiency. This speed of development allowed the United States to narrow the technological gap with its European counterparts before the war's end. The first XP-80 took flight on January 8, 1944, with test pilot Milo Burcham at the controls. Armament consisted of 6 50-caliber M3 Browning machine guns mounted in the nose, providing a concentrated field of fire well-suited to air-to-air combat. The tricycle landing gear, though unusual to some pilots accustomed to tail draggers, proved highly advantageous, especially on the improved runways built to accommodate jet operations. Despite these advancements, production delays and the logistical challenge of establishing jet-capable support infrastructure meant that the F-80 did not see combat in World War II. The war ended before sufficient numbers could be deployed, but the aircraft entered full production soon afterward as the United States prepared for a new era of air power. As the first operational American jet fighter, the F-80 would become more than just a late-war technological achievement. It would serve as the foundation for American jet fighter tactics, pilot training, and future design philosophies, while its adaptability and rugged design would ensure that it remained in service long after newer supersonic fighters replaced it in frontline roles. From its rapid development under wartime pressure to its transformation into a workhorse of early jet combat, the Shooting Star's journey illustrates both the challenges and the triumphs of ushering in the jet age. The prototype and testing phase of the Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star marked the point where theoretical design met the harsh realities of jet-powered flight. The XP-80, later dubbed the Lulu Bell, became the centerpiece of a development program that pushed both engineering knowledge and pilot skill into uncharted territory. Its first flights in early 1944 confirmed the potential of jet propulsion for combat, but also revealed the steep learning curve associated with operating a machine that behaved so differently from the piston-driven aircraft pilots had trained on for years. Initial test flights showcased impressive performance figures for a first-generation jet fighter. Achieving speeds of over 500 mph at altitude, the XP-80 immediately demonstrated its ability to outpace nearly every contemporary American fighter in level flight. Test pilots praised its acceleration and clean aerodynamic lines, noting that it could reach operational altitude faster than any propeller-driven aircraft then in service. Its 6 nose-mounted 50 caliber machine guns offered a centralized firing solution, minimizing convergence issues that often plagued wing-mounted armament on piston fighters. Yet the flights also exposed critical limitations and risks. The British-built de Havilland Goblin engine, while adequate for testing, lacked the power reserves necessary for aggressive combat maneuvering and suffered from reliability issues when operated at sustained high thrust. These shortcomings underscored the urgency of adopting the domestically produced Allison J-33 turbojet as soon as production allowed. The high-speed characteristics of the F-80 forced pilots and engineers to re-evaluate aerodynamic behavior at velocities never encountered by piston-engine aircraft. Compressibility effects, airflow changes approaching transonic speeds, caused unexpected control heaviness during steep dives, prompting refinements to the control surfaces and reinforcing the horizontal stabilizers. Fuel consumption presented another pressing challenge. At full throttle, the turbojet drained fuel at a rate far exceeding that of conventional fighters, necessitating larger internal tanks and the development of standardized external fuel tanks to ensure operational range was practical for combat missions. During this testing era, Lockheed and USAAF personnel worked hand-in-hand to develop entirely new operational procedures for the jet age. Mechanics had to adapt to servicing turbojets, which demanded specialized tools, higher precision parts, and rigorous handling to avoid compressor blade damage. Airfields were modified to handle the faster landing speeds and longer takeoff rolls characteristic of the F-80. Even pilot training was rewritten, with emphasis on managing energy states, throttle sensitivity, and the lag inherent in early jet engine response compared to the instantaneous feedback of piston engines. The XP-80A variant introduced the Allison J-33A9 engine, which produced significantly more thrust and addressed some of the reliability concerns of the Goblin. However, it brought with it new structural stresses and heat management issues, requiring further modifications to the fuselage and cooling systems. The increased power allowed for improved climb rates and marginally better top speeds, pushing the aircraft toward the upper end of performance capabilities for straight-wing jets of its time. Additional refinements included a bubble canopy for better visibility and incremental changes to the airframe to reduce drag, particularly around the engine intakes. Despite these advancements, the aircraft's development was not without tragedy. Test flights pushed the limits of both the airframe and pilot endurance, and several accidents occurred due to unforeseen aerodynamic phenomena and engine failures. These incidents led to stricter testing protocols and the incorporation of stronger airframe components, along with improvements to emergency systems such as the pilot ejection seat, a relatively new concept in American aviation. By late 1945, the refined P-80A, later redesignated F-80, had matured into a production-ready fighter. Though it had missed World War II service, the aircraft was poised to lead the United States into the jet age with a platform that combined respectable speed, reasonable handling, and adaptability for further development. The lessons learned during its testing period went far beyond the aircraft itself, laying the foundation for American jet operations, ground support infrastructure, and combat doctrine. This transitional period ensured that when the F-80 finally entered operational service, it did so as a proven and thoroughly evaluated machine, ready to shape the future of aerial warfare. The F-80 Shooting Star officially entered service with the United States Army Air Forces in 1945, becoming the first operational American jet fighter to equip frontline squadrons. Although its arrival came too late for combat in World War II, its integration marked a critical transition point for the USAF as it shifted from piston-driven to jet-powered air combat. The initial operational units were assigned to training and familiarization roles, as pilots accustomed to P-38s, P-47s, and P-51s required extensive reorientation to handle the vastly different characteristics of jet flight. This period became as much about retraining the force as it was about deploying a new aircraft. The first operational F-80s were fielded with the 412th Fighter Group, based at Marchfield in California, where pilots began building the doctrine for jet fighter employment. These aviators faced a steep learning curve. The jet's throttle response lag, greater landing speeds, and limited endurance demanded entirely new approaches to formation flying, energy management, and mission planning. Instructors quickly identified that the F-80's straight-wing design, while stable and forgiving, required careful energy control and combat maneuvers as early jets bled speed rapidly in tight turns. These lessons would form the backbone of American jet fighter tactics through the late 1940s. As more units received the F-80A and subsequent variants, the aircraft began to assume a broader operational role, serving in air defense, interception, and ground attack training missions. The aircraft's top speed, over 500 km in level flight, made it capable of intercepting most contemporary propeller-driven aircraft and some early jets. Its heavy armament of 6 nose-mounted 50-caliber machine guns gave it substantial firepower for both air-to-air engagements and strafing runs against ground targets. However, its short combat radius, even with external fuel tanks, limited its ability to conduct deep strike missions, and planners initially saw it as best suited for point defense and tactical support rather than extended offensive operations. Despite these constraints, the F-80 became the foundation for American jet aviation doctrine during the immediate post-war years. The aircraft was deployed to bases in Europe and Asia as a deterrent force, replacing aging piston fighters in occupation and garrison squadrons. Its presence in Japan, Okinawa, and later South Korea provided a rapid reaction capability for the United States in the Pacific as Cold War tensions began to shape global strategy. In Europe, the Shooting Star served as a symbol of American technological progress during the early years of NATO, reinforcing the shift toward jet-powered air forces across the Western Alliance. Pilot reactions to the F-80 varied depending on their background. Many lauded its smooth handling, forgiving stall behavior, and exceptional visibility, particularly compared to the cramped cockpits of older fighters. However, some experienced combat pilots criticized its relatively slow acceleration and climb rate compared to emerging jet adversaries, especially as the Soviet Union introduced aircraft like the MiG-15. These critiques highlighted the limitations of first-generation jet designs, even as the F-80 was still establishing itself as a capable transitional platform. One of the aircraft's earliest real-world operational tests came not in combat but in extended patrol and presence missions. Units stationed in Alaska and northern Canada, where harsh weather and vast distances posed unique challenges, found the F-80's reliability to be a key strength. Its rugged construction and straightforward systems allowed it to withstand conditions that grounded more temperamental designs. These deployments also accelerated the development of cold weather maintenance protocols for jet engines, knowledge that would prove critical in later conflicts. By 1948, the F-80 was firmly embedded in the structure of the newly created United States Air Force, no longer a wartime experiment but a standardized operational platform. Its early years of service laid the groundwork for jet-age pilot training, maintenance infrastructure, and tactical doctrine. While it had not yet seen combat, the aircraft had proven itself as a reliable and adaptable tool, ensuring that when conflict inevitably arrived, American jet pilots would not enter the fight unprepared. The stage was set for the Shooting Star to transition from a post-war showpiece to an active combat aircraft, a role it would soon fulfill on the battlefields of Korea. The outbreak of the Korean War in June 1950 thrust the F-80 Shooting Star from a largely peacetime role into the crucible of combat, marking the first extensive use of an American jet fighter in active warfare. When North Korean forces crossed the 38th parallel, the United States Air Force's jet presence in the Pacific was still limited, but F-80 units stationed in Japan quickly became the vanguard of American air power. Their deployment represented not only the introduction of jets into a rapidly escalating conflict, but also the first practical test of American jet doctrine developed in the immediate post-war years. The F-80's early missions in Korea consisted primarily of ground attack and close air support, striking advancing North Korean armored columns, troop concentrations, and supply lines. The aircraft's 6 nose-mounted 50-caliber machine guns and capacity for bombs and rockets allowed it to deliver effective strikes on lightly defended targets. Its relatively stable flight characteristics at low altitudes made it a dependable ground attack platform, though its straight-wing design and high fuel consumption limited loiter time over the battlefield. Air crews quickly adapted by employing hit-and-run tactics, executing fast, concentrated strikes before returning to base to refuel and rearm. While the F-80 initially faced little aerial opposition, this dynamic shifted dramatically with the introduction of the Soviet-designed MiG-15, flown by North Korean, Chinese, and Soviet pilots. The swept-wing MiG, with superior speed, climb rate, and high-altitude performance, quickly outclassed the Shooting Star in traditional air-to-air engagements. F-80 pilots, trained on tactics optimized for subsonic duels, now faced an adversary that could dictate the terms of combat. In response, the Air Force adapted its employment of the F-80, emphasizing ground attack and interdiction roles, while transitioning the air superiority mission to the newer F-86 Sabre, which could better match the MiG's performance. Despite these disadvantages, the F-80 achieved notable successes in Korea, particularly during the war's early months when it was the primary jet fighter available to U.S. forces. Shooting Stars were instrumental in halting North Korean advances by disrupting logistics and providing crucial support during defensive operations such as the Pusan perimeter stand. Even after the arrival of the Sabre, F-80s continued to fly thousands of sorties, striking railways, bridges, and convoys in support of United Nations forces. Their ability to operate from hastily improved airstrips close to the front lines made them more responsive than larger, longer-range bombers, which were better suited for strategic strikes. The aircraft also served as a proving ground for evolving jet combat tactics. Pilots developed methods to mitigate the MiG-15's advantages, including using the F-80's tighter turning ability at lower speeds and altitudes to escape or counterattack, as well as coordinating with Sabres to protect vulnerable strike packages. Maintenance crews working in austere conditions refined rapid turnaround procedures for jet-powered aircraft, ensuring that F-80s could sustain the high operational tempo demanded by the war. Losses were inevitable. Anti-aircraft fire, accidents in Korea's rugged terrain, and encounters with MiG-15s took a steady toll on F-80 squadrons. Yet the aircraft's rugged airframe allowed many pilots to return from missions despite sustaining damage that would have downed more delicate designs. These experiences underscored the importance of survivability in jet combat and informed design philosophies for future fighters. By the war's midpoint, the F-80's role had firmly shifted toward ground attack and close support, with air superiority duties largely ceded to the F-86. Even so, the Shooting Star flew over 15,000 combat sorties during the conflict, dropping millions of pounds of ordnance and firing countless rockets and rounds of ammunition. Its contributions, though overshadowed by the glamour of the Sabre versus MiG duels, were vital to the United Nations' ability to slow, then reverse enemy offensives. In Korea, the F-80 fulfilled its role as a first-generation jet workhorse, adaptable, dependable, and indispensable in the war's most critical early phases. Its performance highlighted both the potential and the limitations of straight-wing jet fighters in a new era of aerial warfare. These lessons would not only guide the immediate transition to swept-wing aircraft, but also solidify the F-80's reputation as the fighter that bridged the gap between the propeller-driven past and the supersonic future. The evolution of the F-80 Shooting Star over its long service life was defined by a series of variants and modifications that expanded its capabilities beyond the role of a first-generation jet fighter. These developments addressed not only performance limitations exposed during early operations, but also the changing needs of the United States Air Force and allied nations as the Cold War unfolded. Through these adaptations, the F-80 became more than a stopgap measure. It transformed into a multi-role aircraft with a service career that extended well beyond what its designers initially envisioned. The initial production version, the P-80A, redesignated F-80A in 1948 when the newly formed USAF adopted the F designation for fighters, set the baseline for the series. Powered by the Allison J-33A9 turbojet, it featured the nose-mounted battery of 6 50-caliber Browning machine guns and a clean, streamlined fuselage that delivered speeds over 550 mph. However, its limited fuel capacity and high consumption rates led quickly to the integration of wingtip-mounted fuel tanks, which became a defining visual characteristic of later variants and significantly improved operational range. The F-80B introduced refinements such as upgraded avionics, strengthened airframe components, and improved gun sights for greater accuracy. Although these enhancements modestly improved performance, the F-80C represented the most significant upgrade of the line. Equipped with a more powerful J-33A35 engine producing 5,400 pounds of thrust, the F-80C offered better climb rates and acceleration, crucial for survival in combat environments where speed could mean the difference between evading or succumbing to enemy aircraft and anti-aircraft fire. Many F-80Cs were retrofitted with air-to-ground ordnance capabilities, including racks for bombs and high-velocity aircraft rockets, firmly establishing the aircraft as a ground attack platform by the Korean War. The trainer versions of the aircraft extended its service well beyond its prime as a combat fighter. The T-33 Shooting Star, developed directly from the F-80C, became one of the most widely produced and longest-serving military jet trainers in history. With an extended fuselage to accommodate a second seat and dual controls, the T-33 not only trained generations of jet pilots in the United States, but was also exported to over 30 countries. Its simple systems, forgiving flight characteristics, and low operating costs made it ideal for transitioning pilots from propeller-driven trainers to frontline jet aircraft. While the F-80 itself began to fade from combat service, the T-33 derivative ensured the Shooting Star's design legacy endured for decades. Specialized variants also broadened the F-80's roles. The RF-80A, a reconnaissance version, replaced the machine guns with cameras, enabling photo reconnaissance missions in Korea and later Cold War reconnaissance flights. These aircraft were used to map enemy positions, monitor troop movements, and assess bomb damage, often flying at low altitudes where their speed made them harder targets for ground fire. Another adaptation was the DF-80, a drone controller aircraft that worked with early aerial target drones, underscoring the versatility of the airframe even as more advanced fighters entered service. Internationally, the Shooting Star saw wide distribution through U.S. military aid programs. Countries such as Brazil, Peru, Turkey, Italy, and Japan operated the F-80, primarily for air defense and pilot training in the 1950s and 1960s. While the aircraft's performance was rapidly eclipsed by supersonic fighters, its relative simplicity, ruggedness, and low operating costs made it a valuable tool for nations building modern air forces on limited budgets. By the time the last frontline F-80s were retired from combat roles in the late 1950s, the aircraft had already established a second life in support functions, including target towing, training, and experimental testing. The widespread use of its derivatives, especially the T-33, extended its design lineage well into the 1980s and even 1990s in some nations. This longevity earned the Shooting Star a reputation not only as America's first true operational jet fighter, but also as a durable and adaptable airframe whose influence extended far beyond its initial role as a wartime necessity. These variants and offshoots demonstrated how a platform conceived under the pressures of World War II could evolve to meet the very different challenges of the early Cold War. The Shooting Star family, particularly through its trainer and reconnaissance versions, became a foundation for jet pilot education and aerial reconnaissance worldwide, ensuring that the aircraft's impact would continue to be felt long after it had left the front lines. The global impact and legacy of the F-80 Shooting Star extend far beyond its relatively brief career as a frontline combat fighter. While its direct participation in high-intensity conflicts was largely confined to the Korean War and early Cold War deployments, its derivatives, exports, and influence on subsequent aircraft cemented its place as one of the most consequential transitional designs in aviation history. More than any other early American jet, the F-80 bridged the gap between the piston engine era and the advent of high-performance supersonic fighters, shaping air forces and pilot training across multiple continents for decades. The most enduring legacy of the F-80 lies in its trainer derivative, the T-33 Shooting Star. Derived from the F-80C with an extended fuselage to house a second cockpit, the T-33 became the standard jet trainer for the United States Air Force and dozens of allied nations. Produced in greater numbers than any other version, it trained countless pilots transitioning from piston aircraft to the jet age. Its docile handling, reliability, and low cost ensured that it remained in service long after the F-80 had been retired as a combat asset. In some countries, the T-33 continued to operate into the early 21st century, a testament to the soundness of the original Shooting Star design. Internationally, the F-80 itself was exported widely, primarily through U.S. military assistance programs during the 1950s and 1960s. Nations such as Brazil, Chile, Peru, Turkey, Italy, Japan, and Colombia incorporated the aircraft into their air forces. These exports allowed countries with limited industrial bases or constrained budgets to modernize their aviation capabilities rapidly, replacing aging piston-engine fighters with jet-powered platforms. Although often relegated to air defense, training, and secondary strike missions by the time they were delivered, these aircraft helped establish operational jet experience in air forces across Latin America, Asia, and Europe. Doctrinally, the Shooting Star's operational history provided critical lessons for the United States Air Force as it moved towards swept-wing designs and supersonic capability. The limitations it displayed in combat, particularly when confronted by swept-wing adversaries like the MiG-15, drove home the necessity of higher thrust-to-weight ratios, better energy retention in maneuvers, and aerodynamic advances that would culminate in aircraft such as the F-86 Sabre and F-100 Super Sabre. Its successes as a ground attack and close support platform, meanwhile, influenced early tactical air doctrine, demonstrating the value of adaptable fighter designs that could serve multiple combat roles rather than focusing solely on air superiority. In the cultural and historical arena, the F-80 retains recognition as the first operational American jet fighter to see combat. While it never achieved the fame of later icons like the Sabre or Phantom, it occupies a crucial niche in aviation museums and air shows as the aircraft that heralded America's entry into the jet age. Restored F-80s and T-33s remain on display or in flying condition in institutions across the United States and abroad, where they serve as educational tools and living exhibits of early jet engineering. The Shooting Star also had a lasting influence on aerospace development programs. Its airframe and systems were frequently used as testbeds for emerging technologies, from radar and electronic warfare suites to experimental weapon systems. The knowledge gained from these trials directly contributed to the development of second- and third-generation jet fighters and even missile programs during the height of the Cold War. By the time the last operational F-80s and their derivatives were finally retired, the aircraft had accumulated nearly half a century of service across various roles in air forces. Its long career, far exceeding what would have been expected for a first-generation jet, underscored the flexibility of its design and the pivotal role it played in acclimating air forces worldwide to jet operations. The Shooting Star's endurance was not the result of unmatched speed or revolutionary performance, but rather a combination of practical engineering, maintainability, and adaptability, qualities that ensured its relevance even as aerospace technology leapt forward. Today, the F-80 and its T-33 descendants stand as reminders of a transformative period in aviation history. They symbolize a time when air combat was redefined, when nations learned to master the challenges of jet propulsion, and when pragmatic, well-designed aircraft could leave an impact far beyond their initial mission. The Shooting Star's half-century of service remains a testament to how even a transitional fighter can shape the trajectory of military aviation for generations. Beyond its widely recognized combat and training contributions, the F-80 Shooting Star also served in a series of lesser-known capacities that extended its relevance well past its expected operational lifespan. These roles, often conducted quietly or outside the public eye, highlight how the aircraft became more than just a first-generation jet fighter. It evolved into a versatile tool for experimentation, auxiliary missions, and technological development during the early Cold War. One of the Shooting Star's most significant but understated contributions came as a testbed for emerging aviation technologies. Surplus F-80 airframes were repurposed by the Air Force and defense contractors to trial new avionics, radar systems, and weapons configurations. In some cases, these aircraft were outfitted with early iterations of radar-ranging gun sights and experimental targeting systems that would later inform the design of second-generation fighters. The aircraft's predictable flight characteristics and durable construction made it an ideal platform for such trials, allowing engineers to gather critical data without the risk or expense of using cutting-edge prototypes. The F-80 also played a role in drone control and aerial target programs during the 1950s and 1960s. Several aircraft were modified into DF-80 controllers, equipped with guidance systems to operate unmanned target drones used for anti-aircraft training and missile testing. This function allowed the Shooting Star to remain active in support of evolving air defense systems long after it had ceased frontline duties. In parallel, some F-80s themselves were converted into QF-80 target drones, remotely piloted and expended during live-fire exercises to validate new weapons and interception tactics. Reconnaissance also became a niche yet important role for the aircraft. The F-80A variant, stripped of its guns and fitted with cameras, flew numerous missions during the Korean War and in post-war surveillance operations. These aircraft conducted low and medium-altitude reconnaissance sorties, photographing enemy installations, frontline positions, and bomb damage assessments. Though vulnerable to ground fire due to their straight-wing design and limited speed, their ability to quickly process and deliver intelligence to field commanders made them a valuable asset in conflicts and in peacetime border monitoring missions. Some F-80s even found use as experimental platforms for aerodynamic and propulsion research. Modified aircraft tested advanced fuel blends, jet-assisted takeoff, JATO systems, and drag reduction modifications that would later benefit more advanced jet projects. Their adaptability for such programs reflected the soundness of the basic airframe, even as newer supersonic fighters rendered it obsolete for combat. Internationally, retired F-80s and their derivatives were occasionally leased or loaned to allied nations for experimental or secondary duties. In Latin America, for example, several shooting stars were employed as transition trainers, or as light strike aircraft in counterinsurgency operations, where their modest performance was less of a liability compared to high-intensity combat scenarios. Their continued operation in these roles extended into the 1970s in some air forces, a remarkable timeline for a design conceived in the midst of World War II. Pilots and technicians who worked with the shooting star in these twilight roles often noted its reliability and forgiving handling as key reasons for its longevity. Test pilots in particular valued its stability when trialing new systems or operating in unconventional configurations. Although it no longer set speed records or dominated in air combat, the F-80's ability to accommodate modification and withstand experimental stresses gave it a second life far removed from the spotlight of frontline service. By the time the last QF-80 target drones were expended and the last DF-80 drone controllers retired, the aircraft had quietly cemented a legacy not just as America's first operational jet fighter, but as a flexible and enduring platform that advanced aviation knowledge across multiple domains. These overlooked chapters of its history illustrate how the shooting star, far from being a mere transitional fighter, became an invaluable workhorse in the broader evolution of post-war air power and aerospace research. The final phase of the F-80 shooting star's story is defined not by its combat records or direct operational achievements, but by its enduring influence, preservation, and symbolic place in the history of aviation. Though its time as a frontline fighter ended by the late 1950s and its derivatives were eventually phased out of military inventories decades later, the shooting star remains a fixture in museums, historical collections, and aviation heritage programs worldwide, a reminder of the dawn of American jet aviation and the transitional role it played. Numerous shooting stars, along with their T-33 trainer derivatives, have been preserved and restored for display, with several kept in airworthy condition by private collectors and historical foundations. Institutions such as the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, and the Plains of Fame Air Museum in Chino, California, showcase fully restored F-80s as part of their permanent exhibits, highlighting the aircraft's pioneering role as the United States' first operational jet fighter. Restored examples serve as tangible artifacts of a period when aeronautical engineering was rapidly advancing from the familiar piston-driven designs of World War II to the sleek, jet-powered machines that would define the Cold War. A small number of privately owned shooting stars and T-33s remain operational, flying in air shows and commemorative events. These aircraft, meticulously maintained by dedicated crews, allow audiences to experience firsthand the sights and sounds of early jet propulsion, with the distinctive whine of the Allison J-33 engine and the aircraft's clean, elegant profile evoking the formative years of jet-powered flight. Their continued operation, while rare due to the challenges of maintaining vintage jets, underscores the fascination and historical respect the shooting star commands among aviation enthusiasts and veterans alike. The aircraft's legacy is also deeply embedded in pilot training culture. The T-33, the most successful derivative of the F-80, trained generations of aviators not only in the United States, but across more than 30 allied and partner nations. For countless pilots, the shooting star lineage represented their first experience with jet aircraft, its forgiving characteristics and reliability providing a critical stepping stone before advancing to supersonic fighters. This training legacy extended into the 21st century in some countries, ensuring that the Shooting Star's influence on global military aviation endured for nearly half a century after its original debut. In the broader context of aviation history, the Shooting Star represents a vital transitional design. It embodied the engineering compromises and innovations necessary to bring jet propulsion into operational service, from the adoption of wingtip fuel tanks to extend its range to the lessons learned from its performance shortcomings against swept-wing adversaries like the MiG-15. Those lessons directly shaped the development of more advanced fighters, from the F-86 Sabre to the early supersonic jets of the late 1950s, making the F-80 a foundational step in America's jet lineage. Culturally, the Shooting Star holds a place as a symbol of the rapid technological transformation that marked the mid-20th century. Though it never gained the same iconic status as later aircraft, it is often remembered as the jet that gave the United States its first real foothold in the new era of air combat. Its use during the Korean War, particularly in the early phases of the conflict, earned it a measure of distinction despite being overshadowed by the more capable Sabre. Today, the F-80 Shooting Star is celebrated not only for what it achieved, but for what it enabled. It represents a generation of pilots, engineers, and maintainers who learned to adapt to the new realities of jet-powered warfare and built the frameworks that would allow future aircraft to dominate the skies. Its preserved examples stand as more than relics. They are enduring educational tools and tributes to a pivotal chapter in military aviation history. When viewed in total, the Shooting Star's nearly half-century of service across combat, training, research, and heritage roles underscores a simple truth. While not the most advanced or glamorous aircraft of its time, it was one of the most consequential. Its impact extended far beyond its years in active combat, shaping doctrines, training generations, and ensuring that the leap into the jet age was met with reliability, resilience, and enduring influence. Even after its formal retirement from combat and training duties, the F-80 Shooting Star's legacy continued in a series of specialized and experimental programs that ensured the airframe remained relevant well into the late Cold War era. These lesser-known chapters highlight how the aircraft, though conceived as a wartime expedient in the 1940s, evolved into a versatile platform for research, weapons testing, and developmental missions that stretched its lifespan far beyond what any early jet fighter was expected to achieve. One of the most notable post-service uses of the Shooting Star was its conversion into remotely piloted targets, designated QF-80. These drones were employed extensively in weapons testing, serving as live targets for surface-to-air missiles, air-to-air weapons trials, and gunnery training exercises. The F-80's rugged construction and predictable handling made it ideal for this role, while the availability of surplus airframes kept costs low for these sacrificial duties. QF-80s contributed significantly to the development and refinement of systems like the AIM-9 Sidewinder and early radar-guided missiles, indirectly advancing air combat capabilities for the next generation of fighters. In parallel, several F-80s were retained as DF-80 drone controllers, equipped with guidance equipment to oversee and direct unmanned targets. These aircraft provided critical support to testing ranges throughout the United States, particularly at sites like Eglin Air Force Base and the White Sands Missile Range. Their service in these programs persisted into the 1960s, illustrating the value of the Shooting Star's stability and reliability in roles far removed from dogfighting and ground attack. The Shooting Star also played a role in aeronautical research. Modified airframes were used as testbeds for experimental fuel systems, drag reduction techniques, and aerodynamic refinements. These programs provided crucial data during a period when designers were pushing the boundaries of jet flight towards supersonic speeds. Although the F-80 itself could not achieve transonic performance beyond a shallow dive, its relatively benign flight characteristics allowed engineers to evaluate incremental changes to control surfaces, intake designs, and wingtip configurations. In some cases, it was employed to trial jet-assisted takeoff systems and to explore the structural impacts of extended high-G maneuvers on straight-wing aircraft. Additionally, a number of Shooting Stars found extended life overseas, not only as operational aircraft but as auxiliary assets in air forces lacking newer technology. In some Latin American nations, surplus F-80s were kept flying as trainers, light strike aircraft, and even as counterinsurgency platforms into the early 1970s. While their combat potential was long outdated by that point, their low operating costs and ease of maintenance made them valuable tools for nations seeking to bolster their air capabilities without investing in expensive modern fleets. Pilots and ground crews who worked with the Shooting Star during these twilight roles often cited its straightforward systems and forgiving nature as reasons for its longevity. Compared to newer, more complex jets, the F-80 was simple to service and resilient in operation. These qualities made it an attractive platform for organizations and missions that prioritized cost-effectiveness and reliability over cutting-edge performance. By the time the last QF-80 drones were expended in weapons trials and the final DF-80 controllers were retired, the Shooting Star had contributed to almost every facet of post-war aviation development, from combat and training to research, testing, and missile program validation. Its persistence into these roles reflected a design that, while never revolutionary in speed or agility, proved adaptable and robust enough to remain useful for decades beyond its intended lifespan. These overlooked assignments complete the narrative of the F-80 as more than just America's first operational jet fighter. They demonstrate how the aircraft became a bridge not only between propeller and jet combat, but also between successive generations of technology and doctrine. The Shooting Star's adaptability in experimental and auxiliary roles ensured that, long after it ceased to be a frontline weapon, it continued to influence the evolution of military aviation in subtle but significant ways. The conclusion of the F-80 Shooting Star's long and varied career left behind a legacy that stretched far beyond its original mission as a stopgap jet fighter. Though born in urgency during the final years of World War II, the aircraft became a central figure in ushering the United States and its allies into the jet age, bridging the divide between piston-powered combat aircraft and the supersonic designs that would dominate the skies in the decades to follow. Its service across combat, training, testing, and auxiliary roles demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of a design created at a time when jet aviation was still in its infancy. By the late 1970s, only a handful of F-80s remained in niche roles as drone controllers, target drones, and experimental platforms, with most having been retired or scrapped. Yet its influence remained deeply embedded in global air forces. Through its trainer derivative, the T-33, the Shooting Star's design shaped the skills and careers of thousands of pilots worldwide, from NATO countries to allied nations in Asia and Latin America. This training legacy meant that even after the last operational Shooting Star left service, its airframe philosophy continued to guide the preparation of generations of aviators for the faster, more complex aircraft that followed. The aircraft's operational record also left lasting doctrinal lessons. The F-80's performance during the Korean War highlighted both the potential and limitations of first-generation jet fighters, driving the rapid development of swept-wing designs and more powerful engines. Its success in ground attack and interdiction missions, despite being outclassed by swept-wing opponents in air combat, influenced early tactical doctrines for multi-role fighters, demonstrating the value of versatility over specialized performance in certain theaters. In preservation, the Shooting Star remains a visible reminder of this transitional era. Dozens of airframes, including both F-80s and T-33s, are displayed in museums worldwide, while a select few continue to fly at air shows. These aircraft, meticulously maintained by enthusiasts and historical organizations, offer modern audiences a chance to witness the beginnings of America's jet-powered journey firsthand. Their presence serves not only as an homage to engineering ingenuity, but also as a tribute to the pilots and crews who navigated the steep learning curve of jet warfare. Culturally, while the Shooting Star never achieved the same iconic status as the F-86 Sabre or the F-4 Phantom, it occupies a respected place in aviation history as the aircraft that paved the way for them. It was the first operational jet to carry American pilots into combat, the first to establish the logistical and doctrinal foundations of jet operations, and the first to demonstrate how adaptable a straight-wing jet could be in roles beyond its initial fighter designation. The aircraft's half-century of service across multiple roles and continents underscores the strength of its design philosophy. It was never the fastest, nor the most heavily armed, nor the most glamorous aircraft of its era, but it embodied the qualities of reliability, simplicity, and adaptability that allowed it to remain relevant long after it was eclipsed in speed and capability. Through combat missions, training flights, test programs, and even its sacrificial use as a drone, The F-80 contributed to every stage of the jet age's early development. Today, the Shooting Star stands as more than a relic of aviation's first jet generation. It is a testament to how transitional designs, often overshadowed by their successors, can exert a profound influence on technology, doctrine, and pilot culture. Its enduring presence in museums and airworthy collections ensures that its story continues to be told, reminding future generations of the moment when America's air forces and much of the world took their first confident steps into the jet-powered future.